Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Danielle and I am the owner and creator over at Damn Fancy Creations. If you guys are new to my channel, I do want to let you know that I have two other tutorial groups. I have a large tutorial group on Facebook and I have a smaller, more personal patron group. Both are really helpful. I try to do exclusive content in my patron group and share helpful tips in both groups to help you guys on your tumbler or epoxy journey. I do want to give a shout out to one of my patrons really quick. Her name is Katrina and she is the owner of Unbreakable Memories. I'm going to link her info down in the description. Please go show her some love and encourage her on her tumbler making journey as well. So for today's tutorial, it's going to be a little bit different. If you guys have followed my channel for a while, you guys know I love doing toppers, mainly dessert toppers. I think they're super fun. I try to do more practical versions that are easy to clean, just simple, but for some toppers, I do go a little bit over the top with them just to see if I can make them cute. So for some of my toppers that you may have seen recently, I have done a s'mores topper where I have graham crackers and marshmallows and chocolate pieces, and I did an all-out sweets dessert cup where I had cookies, little candy pieces, macaroons, all sorts of stuff. I know several of you guys have asked if I can please show you guys how I make these different little pieces that I put on my tumbler toppers. So today is the day. I finally filmed myself making cookies, macaroons, graham crackers, things like that. So I am going to show you guys how I do that in this video. I am going to show you guys how I make them out of polymer clay, and I'm going to show you guys how to make them out of Culture Sculpt, which was previously known as EPOXY Sculpt from CC DIY. I think that both products have their pros and cons. One product I like to use for different things. It just kind of depends on what you want to work with. I do think that the Culture Sculpt is a little bit more lightweight. You can also sand it. You can cut it in half with the blade and break it if you want different pieces, whereas polymer clay may be a little bit more difficult to do, but with polymer clay you can get a little bit more detailed in my opinion. So if you guys are ready to see how I make all these fun pieces for your dessert toppers, let's get started. Alright guys, so the first thing I'm going to show you is cookies out of polymer clay. I prefer Sculpt Primo. Sometimes if I am making larger pieces, I will use Sculpt 3, but it can be a little bit more fragile if you have thinner pieces. So I am just mixing up some different colors. Sometimes you don't have as many clay colored choices as you would like, so I just mix a little bit of tan and brown just to get the base cookie color that I am wanting. And I am just rolling them by hand, and we're just going to flatten them out. Since these are cookies, they don't need to be extremely smooth because cookies are not smooth. This piece of brown clay has already been baked a little bit. You can see that it's hard but still flexible. So I am going to cut strips of it and then cut it up in pieces, and these are going to be our chocolate chips. So once I get these pieces cut up, I am going to mix the majority of them in with one of our balls of clay for our chocolate chip cookie. I will set a few to the side that we are going to use to place on top of the cookies, just so you get the appearance of chocolate chips being mixed in with the dough and some on top. So I'm just pressing it out with my hands, just pressing firmly. I don't want it to be a perfect circle because real cookies aren't 100% circular. And I am going to take some 60 or 80 grit sandpaper and just kind of press it down on the cookie, and this will give it that cookie texture. It's kind of hard to tell from the video, but you can see the texture. And I am going to take milk chocolate and cocoa craze mica, and I am just going to color the cookie with a soft little brush. And this is just to give it the appearance that it was baked and not just raw cookie dough. So again, I'm going in with the darker brown, which is the Cocoa Craze. I use this for all of my chocolate drips as well. But the darker color, I'm just going around the edges with it, just because the edges of a real cookie tend to get a little bit more baked than the center. And when I'm happy with my coloring, I will take a few pieces of the baked clay and add it on top, like chocolate chips kind of poking through. So I am pretty happy with this cookie. I really like how it turned out. So I am just going to lift it up, and we're going to set that one to the side for now. And now we are going to get started on our next cookie. So we're going to start this one the same way. I'm using the same colored dough as my original one, and we're just going to press it out, and then we're going to take our sandpaper again and just kind of mash it all over the clay just to give it that textured appearance. And this cookie is going to have some mini like M&Ms or candy coated chocolates, if you want to call them that. And I am just going to make some little round circles with some different colors that I have, and just kind of press them down slightly so they have that flat M&M appearance. And some of my clay is a little bit harder than others, depends on what brand or type I'm using. But the more you condition it, the more soft it gets, and it will be easier to work with. So I just mixed some yellow and red together so I could make an orange M&M. Like I mentioned before, a lot of colors you just kind of have to mix together. I don't think I was happy with my orange color, so I just set it to the side. So now that all of my little candied pieces are ready, I am going to take my mica and basically do the same thing as the first cookie we made and just brush the mica on there. focusing on the edges. And typically to make the holes for the little chocolate chips, I would use one of my clay dotting tools. But just in case you guys don't have those type of tools, I am just showing you that you can use paint brushes or any other thing that has a, you know, end like this. So once our little holes are formed, I'm just going to press my little candied pieces in there. And then this cookie is finished. And we will set that one aside as well. And now I'm going to show you guys one more cookie that we are going to make. Same colored dough as before. We are just going to press it flat with our fingers. And again, we are going to texture it with our sandpaper. And add some color with our brown mica. Now this one is going to be a little bit different. I'm actually going to use liquid clay, and I mixed a little bit of the liquid clay in with regular white clay. So it looks a little bit more like frosting. You can basically spread it on top of whatever you're working on, and it gives the appearance of like a royal icing or buttercream. And I am going to flatten mine out a little bit because I was going for the appearance of one of the cookies that you would find in the bakery section of a grocery store. So I am going to add some clay sprinkles to the top now. I got these from CCDIY, and since they are also clay, you can bake them in the oven no problem. You can bake clay several times as long as the temperature does not get high, then your clay is not going to burn or anything like that. Actually, the longer your clay is in the oven, the better, because it gives the plastic, which is basically what polymer clay is, a chance to melt together longer. So now this cookie is finished, and we are going to move on to our next section, which is going to be macaroons. So for the macaroons, we are going to use some plastic wrap, a small circular cookie cutter, a blade, and some clay. So I am going to start by rolling out 2 equal-sized circles that I press down slightly. I do want my macaroons to be a little thicker than the cookies that I did, just because macaroons do have a little bit of height to them. So I'm adding the plastic so that the edges have a little bit of a curve to them, whereas if I cut it with a cookie cutter, it would be very straight. So now I have my 2 halves to my macaroon. I am just going to go around the side with a blade. This is just to kind of mark where my feet of my macaroons are going to be. And for the interior or the cream of the macaroon, we are going to just use a small white disc of white clay. And I am just going to gently press them together. I am not going to squish them down. And I am taking one of my tools that I have, but you can also just use a needle. And you're basically just going to rough up the interior. This is just to kind of create the feet of the macaroon. And I am doing this to both sides, the top and the bottom. Just roughing it up a little bit. And then I'm going to take my sandpaper and just kind of roll my macaroon on the sandpaper, which also helps to give it texture. And one is done. So I'm going to show you guys how I do a couple more of these, just because I know some people like to see things more than once. Some people are definitely visual learners. So again, I am just mixing my clay. And I will go ahead and tell you guys that the clay directions on how to bake them are on the back of the package. Most of it, usually you bake at either 230 or 275 for 15 minutes for every 1/4 inch thickness of clay. Now, I typically bake all of my clay pieces for about an hour. Like I mentioned before, the longer the clay bakes, the more time the little pieces have time to kind of bake together and form that bond. Now, I also have an external thermometer because my oven is a gas oven and it does tend to spike when my gas turns back on. So even if my oven is set at 265, sometimes my oven will reach temperatures of over 300, 315, 320 when it goes to heat up again. And clay can burn if it gets that high. So when I know my oven is turning back on, I will just kind of open the door a little bit just to keep it spiking too much. I also bake my clay on parchment paper, and I do bake it on a piece of cardboard on a cookie sheet. That way, if the pan gets really hot, it's not going to burn my clay as well. So there are definitely little tips and tricks that I have learned over the years of working with clay. I used to work with clay, like I mentioned in my intro, years ago. So just kind of learning all those techniques way back then have definitely helped when making little pieces like this. But definitely play with your oven. I would probably test one piece to see how it does and go from there. With thicker pieces, they don't tend to be as fragile. But if you decide to make thinner pieces of different things, typically they should be, generally flexible when you bring them out. You should be able to bend them a little bit without them snapping or breaking. If they do snap or break, then I would suggest leaving them in the oven longer. I would always say a minimum of 45 minutes, but like I said, I usually do an hour. Sometimes 15 minutes just isn't quite long enough for all of the polymer clay to kind of melt together and form that strong bond. So I think I'm going to do one more macaroon. I had some leftover clay, so I figured why not make a tie-dye macaroon. So again, we're doing the same thing. We just rolled out our 2 halves, cut them with our little cookie cutter, and rolling out a white disc of clay. Again, we are just going around the edges with my blade. This is really just to mark where the feet are going to go and just kind of get that texture started. And another tip, if you do have fingerprints on your clay, if it was a little warm, you can always wipe it with a baby wipe or makeup wipe, and it will take those fingerprints right off. And then rolling it on our sandpaper, and we are done. So that is it for macaroons. And now I'm going to show you guys how I make some berries. So berries are a little bit more tedious, but I did want to show you guys how to make them because I know that several of you guys have asked how to do them. So basically, we are going to start by either rolling out a thin line of clay and just cut kind of equal pieces off. If you do not want to cut equal pieces, you can just pinch small little pieces off of your clay, which is typically what I do, but if you guys watch my tutorials, you know I like to show different ways of kind of doing things. And this will take a ton of little pieces, so when you think you cut enough or pinched off enough, cut more. So I'm basically going to roll out a piece of clay, and we're going to shape it kind of like a oval. And I am going to put it on a toothpick just to hold it while I add my little balls of clay. So I am basically just taking each little piece of clay and rolling it into a round ball and then just sticking it on my berry. And we are just going to do this until our berry shape is covered in the tiny little balls. So you guys can see how much that little section just took. So we are just cutting, cutting, cutting. And this clay that I am using is a purple that I mixed some black into just to give it that darker appearance that blackberries have. Blackberries are like a super, super deep purple. They are not fully black, especially the juice that's in them. And these berries probably took the most time out of any of the little treats or desserts that I make, just because there are so many little tiny pieces that you have to apply. So I did skip ahead a good bit just because I don't want y'all to sit here and just watch me apply a ton of little tiny balls. So I'm almost finished with this one. You guys can see that it's pretty covered now. And I am just pressing these on the very bottom of my clay. When I get to the very end, I do take my toothpick out and just kind of lightly hold the berry. I don't want fingerprints. I don't want to smush any of the little tiny pieces. So I am just lightly pressing them on there. When I bake them, they will all kind of melt together. And when you get done, you can always go back and add a few more berries or little berry pieces. So this one turned out super cute. And now that the berry is finished, you guys can decorate these with mica as well if you want to. I chose to use some sparkly black mica from Woody's Goodies and just kind of added, you know, just a little extra to it. It's kind of hard to see in the video because it is so dark, but I just kind of lightly brushed the black kind of all over it just to give it a little shimmer. And once you bake mica onto clay, then it is permanent. It will not wash off or anything. It does kind of melt or bake into the clay, so you don't have to worry about it coming off on your fingers or anything like that. So now that we are done with our blackberry, I am going to show you guys how to do a raspberry. If you guys think that you have this one down or you don't want to watch another raspberry, you can definitely skip ahead a couple minutes to the next section. But again, I know so many of you guys like to see things more than once, and I know it does help visual learners to see things done several times. So again, I am just pinching off some little tiny pieces of clay and rolling them into balls. And I am just kind of making as many as I can. And you guys can see on my wax paper that some of them are a little bit bigger than others. You know, on a typical berry, you're not going to see some that are all exactly the same size. So I wanted my clay berries to kind of reflect that as well. So again, we just rolled out an oval shape of clay and stuck it on our toothpick. And you guys can see with the red one a little bit better what it all starts to look like when you get the berry pieces on there. The dark purple or black one was a little bit more difficult to see. But we are basically just doing the same thing, just going around the berry and adding our little pieces. It kind of looks like a person with really curly hair right now. And obviously, if you make larger little balls, then it won't take as many. So it just depends on how you want your end product to look. And now the person has longer curly hair. The things I notice. So again, once we get close to the end, I just remove my toothpick so I can easily apply the little round pieces to the very bottom of our berry. And again, I am just lightly brushing some of the black mica on just to give it a little more color. So now the last clay suite I am going to show you guys how to make is a slice of cake. So for our cake, I just mixed up some very light yellow clay, and I am going to make basically 3 equal rectangles. Next, I am going to get a piece of white clay. I am going to flatten it out and put it between the layers of cake. This is going to be our icing layer. And then we'll add another flat piece of white clay on top of this layer. So now we have the beginnings of our cake slice. So I'm going to use my blade and cut it pretty square. And then I am going to roll out another thin piece of white clay and flatten it all the way down the top and the side of the cake. So now it's starting to look more like a cake layer. Cut off any of those random pieces. And then I am going to take my little tool that you guys see me use in almost every single tutorial that I do, no matter what it is. And I am basically just kind of doing squiggly lines throughout the cake just to give it some texture. Cake definitely has more texture than cookies do, so I wanted that to kind of show through in this. And don't forget to get the front side of your cake as well. So I'm basically just kind of doing figure 8s, circles, little squigglies, just to kind of rough up the clay and give it that cake-like texture. And just a note to point out right now, if you leave oven baked clay sitting out, it is not going to dry up. I've had clay, sitting around for years. You can typically, condition it back to being workable. You can add a little bit of liquid clay also to get it a little bit more soft, but I typically don't have any problems with it getting too hard to work with. So then I'm just going to kind of flatten the texture down with my sandpaper so it doesn't get rid of the texture, but it just kind of evens everything back out. And again, I am going to take some CC DIY sprinkles and place them inside of our cake slices like a funfetti cake. And now we are going to use this liquid clay again, since it has that frosting-like texture. This is perfect for cakes. I know I'm a little bit out of frame, but I am just taking this liquid clay and just kind of spreading it on the edges. And then I am just kind of moving it in a circular motion just to get that frosting appearance. So once you get that liquid clay on, it really looks like a cake slice. And that is all I have for polymer clay for today. So now it's time to move on to Culture Sculpt. If you guys are new to Culture Sculpt, which is previously known as EPOXY Sculpt, it is a two-part sculpting epoxy. You definitely need to wear gloves while using this. I am going to start by making cookies first, and I will talk about all the different additives as we go. So the first thing you want to do is get out equal parts of part A and B of the Culture Sculpt. And we are going to mix both parts together. I do not put a time limit on how long I mix each part for. You can tell that one part is a little bit more white and one is a little bit more off-white. So I really just mix until I can't see any pure white in my mixture. That way I know that everything is mixed pretty well. And I will typically fold in the edges to the center. And I am taking some tan dispersion colors and I'm just going to mix that in. I do like using dispersion colors when I color my Culture Sculpt. I feel like it gives it a more smooth color than acrylic paint does or other additives. And it just takes a little bit just to get the color that you're looking for. So I'm pretty happy with this color. It does look kind of like cookie dough. And I am going to go ahead and flatten out the dough for all of my cookies. That is one thing with Culture Sculpt. There is a time limit. So you do have to work fairly quickly or it will start kind of hardening up on you. And we don't want that to happen. So for my chocolate chip cookie, I am mixing in some chocolate pieces that I made from epoxy. You guys can see my little chocolate mold right beside me. I believe I got mine from Michael's or Hobby Lobby years ago, but they do have similar molds on Amazon. And we did the same thing we did with the polymer clay. We just mixed in some of those pieces, flattened it out. I know you guys can hear my train in the background. It comes through at the best times. So the first two are my chocolate chip cookies. And then I am going ahead and flattening out my other cookies just so my epoxy sculpt does not start to heat up and cure. Now I also decided to make some graham crackers while I was at it. If you guys have watched my s'more tumbler tutorial, this is how I made my graham crackers. I just did this by hand. If you want to use a rectangle mold or something like that just to get the edges perfectly straight, you can definitely do that. I kind of like the, you know, imperfection look of it. So I am just kind of smoothing out any little cracks that I see. And I am just taking one of my spatulas and just kind of squaring up my graham crackers a little bit. And I like to take my gloves off after I finished using Epoxy Sculpt because I don't want any of the Epoxy Sculpt mixture to get on things that I would typically use, like my sandpaper or dispersion color bottles or things like that, or my tools. So here's my dotting tool that I was referring to earlier. If you don't have a dotting tool, again, you can just use the end of a paintbrush or something similar. And we're doing the same thing. I am taking my mica and just lightly dusting my cookies. Now I will say both of these, the Culture Sculpt and the Polymer Clay, have their pros and cons. The Culture Sculpt is definitely a more lighter weight material. I do like it for the cookies and the graham crackers because it does have a more realistic look and texture to them. But you do have to work quicker with the Culture Sculpt. You cannot leave it out or it will harden, and you definitely have to wear gloves with it. So for my grams, I am basically dusting the same way. I am just doing the edges and a little bit in the center. And another thing with the Culture Sculpt, that you can cut it with a serrated blade after if you want it in pieces. I did that with my chocolate chip cookies and with my graham crackers, so I had smaller pieces to work with on my tumblers. So for my grams, I made the little holes, I guess if you want to call them that, with a small end of a small paintbrush. And then I just took my tool and kind of scored down the center just to give the appearance of the graham cracker sections. And now I'm going back and adding my chocolate pieces on top of my chocolate chip cookies. And now I really would like to go eat some chocolate chip cookies right now. So I am setting these to the side for just a second so I can make the other pieces, the little chocolate candied pieces that are going to go on top of my cookies. So again, I put another pair of gloves on. You do not want to mix this stuff with your hands, or with your gloveless hands, I should say. So we're just mixing together a small batch of this. And I am sectioning them off because I know I don't want to color all of this. I am going to make some macaroons as well. So I am going to leave some parts white for the macaroon filling. So this green is basically the same green that I use for my mint chocolate chip scoop cups. It is Verdant Villa and Sky Blue Dispersion colors mixed together. So for these macaroons, I am just kind of forming them to how I want them. Epoxy Sculpt does tend to be a little bit more sticky, so it would stick to plastic wrap if I tried to do the same technique I use for polymer clay. So we are forming these by hand and just kind of smoothing out all the edges or top parts. So you guys can see that Epoxy Sculpt is already kind of sticking to the wax paper. That's just one thing with Epoxy Sculpt I have found. And especially if you add colorants to it, for some reason it does get a little more sticky quicker if you add colorants to it. So we are going to do the same thing that we did for our polymer clay macaroons. And the same thing, we're going to roll it on our sandpaper. And you can use a little bit of water to kind of smooth out Epoxy Sculpt, so that does help. So I did decide to try to use the plastic wrap. You guys can see that it does stick a little bit. So you do have to work kind of quick. And then we're making the feet of our macaroons. And again, rolling it on the sandpaper to just kind of even out the edges, but still have that texture. So I am just kind of showing you guys these videos just so you can kind of see the difference between working with Epoxy Sculpt and polymer clay. That is one of the pluses with polymer clay, is that you don't have to wear gloves. You don't have to worry about it being extremely sticky. It has a really good workable texture, but it can be a little bit heavier. And I do think that the Culture Sculpt does have a little bit better texture and realistic look when it comes to making things like this. And I think this is my last macaroon that I am working on. I have a bunch of tiny macaroons lying around now. So I did decide to just make my little candy pieces with the same color as the macaroons. I did make a little ice cream scoop that was this same color. So I planned on adding all of these to a dessert tumbler, which I also did, if you have seen that cup floating around. So I am just making little circles and pressing them into the indentions that we already made. And that is basically it for this tutorial. Typically, epoxy sculpt will be dry in about 6 to 12 hours, and then you can cut them with a serrated knife if you want to and add them to your toppers. So here are some finished tumblers I made using my little pieces. A lot of the little candy pieces you see are actually on the CCDI website as well. But I just love how these turned out, and I hope you guys do too. If you guys enjoyed this video or learned something new, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Don't forget to stay tuned for the next video coming up that was picked just for you. As always, if you're looking for more tips, tricks, and tutorials, please be sure to find my tutorial group on Facebook or check out my Patreon group. Both are linked in the description. Thanks for watching.